it was only in some of my lowest moments that I realized that the person that I was, the person that I was becoming, were two different people. And I needed to be able to identify, who I really wanted to be, not just for myself, but for my children, because what is the legacy I wanted to leave behind?
Hi, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. Shafer of Talks with Dr. Shafer. I'm so glad you're here. I'm a mom, physician, author, publisher, and I'm passionate about helping others reclaim their stories so they can build their most beautiful future. And we have a beautiful future builder here on the show today, and she's helping others do it as well. Dr. Michelle Machado, PhD, MBA, is a NeuroChange Solutions Consultant, speaker, and mentor who seeks to support corporate professionals and youth in building resilience and finding success. A mom of two who has worked with universities across the globe, Dr. Michelle Machado helps people build a resilient mindset. So important. A two-time TEDx speaker and author of Alive Again, 4 Steps to Reclaim Yourself in a Distracted World, Dr. Michelle Machado is here today on Talks with Dr. Shafer to share her story and her tips on how to build a resilient mindset and invest in reconnecting in a disconnected world. Dr. Michelle, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shafer, for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
It is such a pleasure. I've been looking forward to this discussion and really wondering. So, you, as we just introduced our storyteller audience to you, we've listed all of the wonderful things and ways that you are impacting the world. Someone who resonates with myself in the way that we're very multifaceted, multidimensional. And when you have that mindset, I always want to know the story behind how you landed where you are and what inspired you to focus your career on mindset work and on helping people reconnect.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think, starting out, I followed the typical path, right? I was very good in high school. I had the good grades. I went to university. I actually wanted to become a doctor, but that's a different story for another day.
When
I
you
ended up
did, but not a medical doctor.
not a medical doctor, indeed, which in hindsight, I'm glad I didn't because I work with training medical with, future doctors. And I don't think that that is where my strengths lie. But I think just nonetheless, following that path, it was just sort of saying yes to every opportunity that came, but also not necessarily giving up when doors would close. And so, for example, when I was in university trying to sort of, I finished my undergraduate, I wanted to do postgrad. Because of my circumstances and working 3 jobs to put myself through school, I didn't have the great grades. And so often I didn't get into institutions that I wanted to, study certain programs. And so rather than saying, okay, I'm just gonna, do whatever shows up and whatever I get accepted into, I decided to look overseas. And I was like, there has to be someone or a program that will be, something that I'm really interested in. And that led me into the UK. And really, that was my foot in the door. I started studying a degree that was really around, forensic anthropology, biological anthropology, human anatomy, and essentially that opened the door for medical school or working in medical schools. One job led to another, and I found myself moving from the UK to Australia because my future husband was in Australia, lived there for a number of years, and again, the opportunities came our way, and both my husband and I are very much of the mindset that, if an opportunity comes your way, I think sometimes it's the universe's way of sort of wanting you to lean into it most of the times. And so we just said yes. So we circled back from Australia to Hong Kong, back to UK, and now I live in Toronto. And so I found myself in this academic career, moving from anatomy tutor to a lecturer to an associate professor to a director, really stepping into very senior leadership roles. But in that process, I think, following through what society tells us to do, finish your school, finish your college, get a degree, get a job, get married, have kids. I think I lost part of myself in that process. And because it was so normal, I was living sort of in autopilot mode. I never stopped to question what it is that, I wanted, what it is I wanted to really support and serve in other people. And so it was only when I moved to Canada during the height of the pandemic that there was this sort of, deep longing as well as deep exhaustion that found me at the, a really low point, which is when sort of things started to shift in my life. So
Mm.
it's sort of working through, the societal pressures that we often face in our life, but at the expense of that, we often mask our own sort of voices, our own callings, our own intuition. And I had done that for a long time.
You made me wonder because when we talk about society, there's this unspoken definition behind the word about, well, what is society? Where are you coming from? What society are you a part of? Where are you within the society, right? There are all these different echelons and things that when we say the societal pressures, we don't necessarily, are you a woman? Are you a man? Right? Are you from a minority group? Right? Like we don't
100%.
necessarily address all of those different layers and how they affect how we feel we need to show up or how
Yes.
society, as we said, expects us to show up. So I love your insights on that and your experience as a working woman. I also am wondering, as someone who has a pretty unique experience of living so many places, and so
Hmm.
being really a part of so many different local societies and then a global society because you're a global speaker and professional, you speak all these places. How has that shaped you, affected you, and what differences did you see? And what I'm feeling in my bones is that once you see the rules are different everywhere else, you kind of decide, I guess I just get to make up my own rules.
100%. I think so. To answer your first question, I come from a traditional Indian Portuguese background. So I grew up in the Middle East. And, by the cultural norms there were very different for men as it was for women, right? And so as a young girl growing up in that culture, your job, your responsibility was, be that good daughter, be that good, listener, support everyone in the family, help out, get good grades. Often there are pressures as well in our culture to, once you're done education, find a partner. However, I come from a very, beautiful family where I never had that pressure from my parents. It was really around, I want you to study, to find a career that you love, and to support yourself independently before you go down that path. And so I was very fortunate in that regard, but I do know the pressures that are instilled among, young girls and then women to show up very differently. And so that's the kind of upbringing that I had. And I've seen that whether I've grown up in the Middle East, whether I've lived in Canada, those pressures are still very, very present in those sort of cultures. Then having moved and lived in different countries, being very independent, not having to conform to any of those pressures because in many of the countries I lived in, I didn't have any family there. So I kind of, got to make up my own rules. And that was very liberating in that because it sort of allowed me to create a definition of, who am I and what rules do I get to live by? So that was very, I would say, unique for my situation, but also allowed me to be able to create my own life in that perspective. But different cultures have different sort of challenges as well. So, Australia has got a very Western culture, very similar to North America in that sense. Very laid back, so work cultures are different compared to work cultures in Asia, compared to work cultures in England. And so having to adapt takes a little bit of resilience because people often think, oh my gosh, you've lived in all these countries. That's so exciting. That's amazing. And yes, it's fantastic. But moving from one continent to another, uprooting where you've landed on in one place and then having to start over from scratch, that requires, a different set of, different skill altogether. I think it takes it a whole level up from resilience because it's not just sort of being able to move into a new continent and being able to sort of put your roots down. But every time that I moved into a new country, I was stepping into new roles right away. I had children at the time, so I'm also juggling being a new mom at the same time, navigating those new communities, new environments. And so you really have to have a very, very strong approach and perspective and mindset to life to be able to, get through day to day. But in doing so, when I shifted to Canada, it was really eye opening to see that, all of the different sort of the independence that I had had many years on, it kind of backtracks when you find yourself back in your family home, when you find yourself back in a similar culture that you grew up in. And it's like those pressures haven't really gone anywhere. They're maybe a little bit more invisible. And you then have to ask yourself, do I conform again? Do I or can I stay grounded? And I think I felt a little bit of those pressures, upon moving back. And so I always say to my husband, that repatriating back to Canada, where I grew up for many years, was harder than moving to each of the other countries where I had no one. And so I guess that says a lot in terms of, pressures that we face as women.
That's really fascinating. And it brings me to a quote that I really wanted to share from your TED Talk, The One Legacy We Can't Afford to Pass Down. And there are the behaviors and habits that we kind of like we put them in our backpack and we take them with us along with our
Yeah.
limiting beliefs and our eye and hair color and all that stuff from our early life experiences. And then there's the person that we are when we're literally like, here in the States, we often think about Thanksgiving in the
Yeah.
US because Thanksgiving is kind of a universal experience of many people go
Yeah.
home
Yes.
and they're kind of immediately plopped back into what it often feels like a pressure cooker experience,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
there's the things that we're carrying around every day. When we're in an environment that we have hopefully made steps with our habits and curated to be supportive for the story we want to live and tell. And then there's when we get like plopped back into this narration that we're not the director of, right? We're just like a
Yes.
side character in it. So it's really interesting to hear you reflect on that. And it made me think of from the talk, a quote that really stuck with me was, "You cannot lead, love, or live fully if you have ghosted yourself," which again, in those
Hmm.
moments, we kind of ghost ourselves,
We
the
do.
person we are now. And you said, we're so busy tending to everything outside, deadlines, emails,
Yeah.
expectations, that we
Yeah.
stop listening to what's in here. And until you look inward, right, and turn out that noise, you will keep modeling the habits, the beliefs, and the legacies that you never meant to pass down.
100%. And I think for me, that's been the pivotal moment from when when I came back to Canada and having sort of reaching sort of a very low point in my life where I was always trying to keep busy with something from the outside, whether it's tending to work, tending to my family, tending to like, okay, let's go here, let's do this, really at the expense of not listening to the inner voice. And I think so many of us do that today. We often try to utilize something on the outside to prevent what we're feeling on the inside because looking inward can be very raw, very, eye opening, and we're not necessarily prepared to face it. But it was only in some of my lowest moments that I realized that the person that I was, the person that I was becoming, were two different people. And I needed to be able to identify, who I really wanted to be, not just for myself, but for my children, because what is the legacy I wanted to leave behind? I was showing up in ways with, all of the pressures, whether it's the personal pressures and the pressures of the move, the pressures of settling into a new role, be living in my parents' basement when I moved to Canada during the COVID, starting from scratch, having two young ones whose lifestyles were completely disrupted and dealing with that while sort of leading a professional team. All of those pressures sort of compacted into like one giant, giant, massive pressure that just felt like I couldn't go on. And so looking at those and looking at how am I showing up in my day-to-day life? And is this how I want to show up for my girls? Is this how I want to show up for my loved ones? And realizing that no, well then the only thing that needs to change is not something on the outside. It's not them, it's me. I'm the one that has to change. And so that was for me a very raw moment that kind of shifted and pivoted me into a very different, style of living and into who I am today.
Hmm. So when that moment hit you, it's interesting when we talk about changing. habits and changing
Mhm.
kind of the tone of how we're living, one, it requires an understanding, kind of taking an inventory of what life looks like, right? How am I
Yeah.
spending my time? How are
Yeah.
my relationships? And that's kind of yucky. Right? We
Yes.
don't necessarily want to do that. That's painful. But something often we only do that often once we reach a pain point. And it sounds like, again, moving in back to your
Yeah.
childhood home or with your parents
Yeah.
was that, that dissonance was great enough, that pain, that it really sparked a change. How did you, so we see the thing that we want to change, but often we can't necessarily change the thing we want to change. We have to implement
Mhm.
habits that support us towards what we want to grow into. So when you felt that need, what were some small steps that you said, I'm going to think this way with my mindset, or I'm going to incorporate these habits to try to get me where I want to be because this is painful and I can't stay here?
Yeah, and I just want to pick up on what you said, which is something I speak about in my book. The first pillar of the book is awaken. And I often say that you cannot change what you cannot see. And most often, we're running an autopilot on a day-to-day basis, which is what I was doing. And in that process, you're not able to see because you're like, I don't have time for this. I don't have time to sit with myself and ask myself deep questions. But it's in those moments where, like you said, although they are painful, that is where you start to unravel and start to sort of identify patterns of behavior that are lurking underneath, that are causing you to feel and, experience life in some way. So that was my first, sort of those low moments were my awakening period. And I will say that it didn't happen in one night. And so everything was perfect after then, because again, it's a painful, it's an evolution, it's a process. And so through that, reflection period, I eventually then moved into the next step, which is what I call alignment. And that is, again, the questions that I've alluded to before, which is how am I showing up right now? And who do I want to be? So what is right now, my life, I'm living by default. I'm living on a day to day, like a hamster wheel. But how do I create a life by design? How do I create a life that I really feel in alignment with, of where I want to go, who I want to be, how I want to show up? And having gone through that process, again, it takes weeks, often, sometimes months to be able to really think through that. Then you create the practices to help you implement that behavior. And so that's the activate pillar. And one of the biggest shifts that I did fundamentally in my life that has shifted me and is, 3, 4 years into the practice now is I have a morning practice. And I talk about that practice where before everyone in the house is awake, I am awake. And that is my me time. And that is time for me to just settle into, I'm a very faith based person. So that's time for me to spend time with, scripture, with me to sort of just reflect on the day to day, to do a meditation, and the reason I do that, even though it requires me waking up earlier than everybody else, is that it just grounds me. So that my girls, when I go to wake them up, they receive the best of me because I've poured into my cup. I often say you can't pour from an empty cup. Well, I don't say it. It's a quote I think by John Maxwell. And so I think, just really living through that practice and embedding that into my day to day life, even on a weekend, I'm just able to give the best of myself to my girls, to my spouse, to my family. No matter what happens in the day, I'm able to react and respond to it in a better way than I would had I just gotten out of bed, checked my phone, and dove into the activities of the day.
Yeah. That's so incredibly important. The awareness and then the habits. And also the recognition, as you mentioned, of that this isn't a quick fix, right? We even think about a
No.
physical wound, and we know physical wounds are, generally speaking, much less tricky to deal with than the
Yes.
mindset
Yes.
wounds and
Yes.
the childhood wounds that we have to,
Yeah.
learn how to live with and move forward from, but
Yeah.
knowing that there still might be scars there, right? But how do we want to move forward? What is the legacy that we want to
Yeah.
intentionally create? It's so important to understand, as you said, that takes months or even years. We
Yours.
talk to patients after they've had strokes. People used to often stay home after they've had a stroke
Yeah.
because they believed that once it's broken, you bought it. It is what it is. It's not going to be fixed and no one can help you.
Yeah.
And that's just not true in many ways. We do
Yeah.
have new amazing treatments, clot buster treatments, et cetera, to help. But also there's so many other important things, therapies and things that
Yeah.
you incorporate, again, those habits and tools you incorporate every day into your life to rehabilitate. Because now we understand that instead of being like glass that you just like break and it's
It's
broken, it'll
done.
never do the same
Hmm.
again, we now understand the brain is more like plastic, right? And so I
Yeah.
think of the therapies and medicines as things, but the therapies even more than anything else in the post-acute phase as almost like heating that plastic up, closing that gap as much as we can
Yeah.
and getting to a place where we may not function or look the exact same way we did before, but there is functionality there, and we're learning how to make the most of the tool of the body that we have and the health we have and move forward and keep on building. And again, working with our neuroplasticity. And not only is the concept important from the beginning, but it's so important to understand that that healing is happening a year later, or maybe even 2 years later, depending
Yes.
upon your degree of resilience, something you talk a lot about, and all the other factors in your life. But the nervous system is really amazing. And the thing that I'm really passionate about as a neurologist is for people to understand there's not really there's not a difference between your mind and the body. They
No,
are one.
they are
And
one.
you can't say, oh, this all is just this ethereal, it's not that meaningful. It doesn't sound scientific if I can't see a picture of it. It's incredibly important.
Yeah.
When we work on mindset and habits, we are changing our brains
100%.
on a neurochemical level. Like we are changing
Yeah.
the structure of our brains. And that's why I'm so passionate about having experts like yourself on to talk to our storytellers and really reinforce this idea that just because life might feel a bit broken right now, or you might feel a bit broken right now, or your habits, your days might feel a bit broken,
Hmm.
you're not broken. And there are ways that you can move towards being the version of yourself that you want to be, but today maybe feels impossible or too far out of reach.
Yeah, 100%. I think you captured some really key points. Obviously, neuroplasticity, which is incredible and allows us to recognize that we are capable of change. We often say, my personality is I'm always like that. That's just the way I am. But really, we have a choice in how we show up. And often it's the consistency of those choices over time that really solidify, in our brain, we talk about nerve cells that wire together, right? Hebb's law. And so, really understanding that if you want to change something in your life, it's not a quick fix. There's no short term diet or exercise that may result in that pattern, or whether it's behavioral, that will allow you to feel like you've shifted over in a weeks to months, because consistency over time, repetition over time, changes the brain in such a way that those sort of neural connections get strengthened even further. And in doing so, it allows change to become automatic, that new pattern to become automatic. And that's where we lose people a lot, right? We often, think of New Year's resolutions, or think of anything new that causes us to get out of our comfort zone, what we're often used to. We step into this new sort of arena, and our body is like, well, what's going on here? This feels uncomfortable. And it tries to pull us back into those same patterns of behavior. But that's where the awareness kicks in. That's where the alignment kicks in. If you recognize what your body is doing, what your brain is doing, and if you remember what are the things that you really want to work towards and utilize that information to create consistent practices, then over time, this new shift in behavior is going to become your new normal. And I think that's one of the biggest feats and advice that I can offer from my own experience. Like I've said, in my morning practice, I'm in the third year now of consistent daily practice. There have been like a handful of days that I've missed because of, either it was a late night or we're on vacation or something has happened. And I've seen a shift in how I show up that day. And so for me now, it is a non-negotiable for me. Like whether it's a weekend, whether it's a vacation, I am up, whether it's 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, it depends how I'm feeling. I am up before the house because I need to fill my cup before I can give to others. And I think, unfortunately, we live in a world where so much of change is coming at us, where so many pressures are being put on people that people feel like they don't have enough time for themselves. Some don't really get any time for themselves. And I think that makes us stretched out even more. That makes us more anxious, more angry. And so I think sometimes the root part of it is finding time to really pour back into you, because that's ultimately, one of the greatest things that you can do for yourself.
It makes me think about subscriptions. I think the majority of humans have all these subscriptions like
Yes.
out that, they're getting charged for and it's depleting their bank account
Yeah.
every single month that they're not even using. So it's depleting their resources, but they're not benefiting from it, right? And so
Yeah.
people will say, very wise people will say, hey, make sure you go through your subscriptions and get rid of the things you're not using, and you'll be shocked at what's there depleting your bank account. And it makes me think about, when someone is offering you a quick fix, like we said, take it from two doctors, like there is no quick fix.
There's no. Yeah.
It doesn't exist. So if someone is selling you a quick fix, that's a distraction and it's a detraction from your
Mhm.
attention, your energy, and your resources that you could be investing in actual change making, right? I talk about it with my friends and my family, my kids. In general, my approach to life is I only want builders, not breakers in my
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
And that goes from content, right? The things in my life to the people in
Yeah.
my life. I
Yeah.
don't do breakers anymore. I used
Yeah.
to do breakers. I used to let
Yeah.
them touch my heart. I was
Yeah.
recently somewhere where someone was very negative. They kind of came in like a rain cloud, and
Mhm.
they were shooting rain and lightning bolts and thunder all over the room.
Yeah.
I clocked it, but it didn't touch me. It didn't get wet. And then I left the event and my friend said, "Oh yeah, that's pretty typical." And I was like, "Oh, okay." Like it literally hadn't touched me. And in that moment, I was so profoundly grateful for work I've done
Yes.
because not that long ago, I'd be thinking, "Oh my gosh,
Yes.
what's wrong with me? Why is this weather changing? What did I do to change the weather
Yeah.
when that weather has nothing to do with me?" We all have our own weather systems and we can decide how we're showing up.
100%. Two things you mentioned when you talk about, the subscriptions. I can so relate to that because I've done that in the past, right? You subscribe to something and you're like, in 1 week I'm going to cancel. It's the free trial. I'm going to cancel, and you don't get canceled and you get charged. And then you go eventually to cancel it, and they'll try to prolong it for another week. Try it for a bit longer. And that's, again, it's a tactic, right? Because they know human behavior. They know that people will say yes and they'll forget about it and their bank account will be charged. So I love that you brought that up. It's so pertinent. I think the second piece, just around, gosh, what were you saying now? It's like slipped my mind.
The weather
The
people
weather, the
bring.
energy. Yes. I mean, energy ripples out, right? Energy transfers. And so we all feel it. We've all walked into that room where, we felt there's something going on here. Like the air in this room just feels very tense. That's because energy transfers. And so, I love that you shared that awareness of knowing, who you're going to allow into your life and who you're just not going to tolerate. Or even if they are who they are, you're not going to let it affect you. It comes nowhere. You have a shield up. And I think that's so beautiful and so powerful because that ultimately impacts us. You can just see how a cycle of, if it's toxic energy or, tense energy, it just ripples out and it will allow you to get more upset and more angry and more frustrated. But that awareness stops it all. And so I love that. It's so beautiful.
Thank you. Well, it's interesting. You opened a thought in me about like so I was in that environment and this was a family member
Yeah.
in this environment, right? This is not someone
Yeah.
that that won't be there, right? This
Yeah.
is their space. And it's interesting because as we talked earlier about how we feel when we get dropped into our home environments with our family,
Yeah.
it's Thanksgiving. Oh no, Uncle Bob's going to be there. Oh, like rehearse what I'm going to say or, how long I
Yeah.
have to be in the room, etc. It's interesting how once we've done all that work, which took years to do, where, okay, your weather system is yours. Like, I don't even need to pack a rain jacket. I'm not going in your system. I'm going to be in my weather. Whereas when we are too close to people, it can be a very different feeling in our nervous
Yeah.
system. But again, it's not that it's not attainable. It's that we're kind of going into that slippery slope of these neural pathways that formed in our childhood and our past
Hmm.
relationships of like the character that we
Yes,
play, and we kind of cosplay as a character that really isn't who we
we are.
are anymore. And I
Yeah.
think for me, the people that I respect the most, the women that I look up the most to, are the people that are very, I say, self possessed.
Hmm.
They set their weather, they set their
Yeah.
mood, they show up as themselves,
Yeah.
they acknowledge you, they're respectful, but you're not going to change how they are showing up. Do you have any advice or any mindset tools that you've picked up with your work and with your experience, right?
Hmm.
When you really were in
Hmm.
that painful position and you had, sink or swim, I've got to figure this out,
Yeah.
of when, you feel like, okay, I've got this all figured out. I'm in control of my emotions.
Yeah.
But then I call it the trigger detector, your nervous
Hmm.
system, when you feel something triggered, to get curious about that
Yeah.
instead of furious when that trigger detector goes off. When you feel
Yeah.
yourself slipping into a way of thinking that's going to snowball into showing up in an old version of yourself that doesn't fit you anymore.
And I think this is great. And I think this is why having that self awareness is really important. So I have a chapter in my book where I talk about, sometimes slipping into that performance. And when you're around family members or partners where you feel like you're being triggered or you're being kind of sucked into a vortex of negative energies, and I have what I call, expand, like an expand, release, discern framework, which is really around making a list of the people in your life who expand you, who make you feel at peace, who make you feel empowered, who, support you and want to see you win. Make a list of those people because it's really important to really just document, the key relationships in your life, the people that you see, whether it's often or, sporadically, how they make you feel. And so that's kind of one part of it. The second part of it is the release. Make a list of the people who, when you're in their space or you're in their environment, they are not really bringing out the best in you, or they make you feel less than, or they make you feel like they're just always negative and that negative energy is kind of, rubbing at you. Make a list of those people. And it's sort of like addition and subtraction, right? So it's like the people that expand you, you want more of. The people that don't expand you, you want to release them a little bit. And then I do have a part that says, of course, with family, you can't release them because they're your family. And so in that space, it's just being aware. And, one of the toolkits that I use from that is the self-awareness piece, which we call metacognition, right? Just really being aware of how you're showing up, how people are making you feel, but drawing a little bit of empathy for the people in front of you that have particular behaviors, because often we are very judgmental as well. And I do this, and I've done this with my child who's now 10 years old when she was 7, because she had, a situation where someone was saying certain things to her and it wasn't appropriate. And I did this empathy triangle, which I think we've probably seen online, which is, the iceberg, right? We see parts of people as they show up in front of us. But what we don't often see underneath that is all of the things happening in their life that is causing them to appear that way. And so in situations like that, and I've been around situations where people are negative or they're just toxic, and I show a lot of love and empathy in that space for them. I don't judge, and I allow them to be how they are. And I will sometimes say something to say, I know that kind of sucks, but have you thought about looking at it from this perspective? Like, look at it this way. And I try to provide a spin, and sometimes they may latch onto it, and sometimes they'll be more negative. And I just say, but that's okay. It's okay to feel that way. And I try to step away. Having that awareness and having that empathy just means that I don't get affected, that I know it's not about me, it's about them. But the best thing you can do for people like that is show up as who you are, because that's going to eventually cause them to think, how is this person not getting rattled? How is this person so joyful? How is this person not getting phased by any of this? That's the best way you can lead, by example. And so this expand, release, and the discern part of it is really being able to really make those distinguishing, those discernments about who fills your life, who doesn't, and how do you want to show up in spaces where you are in those environments, is really instrumental in building the back pocket awareness, so that when you are in these environments, you're priming your brain of how you're going to react. You have to prime your brain, right? You have to sort of mentally rehearse, okay, I've got this family reunion, or I've got this event that I know this person's going to be there. It could be an ex, it could be a relative. I don't, and they're probably going to trigger me, and they're probably going to say something to me. So back mental rehearsal of how you are going to show up in that space, and showing up just as you are, not letting anything or anyone impact you, is going to really, really change the way you show up in that actual space, in that actual environment.
The preparation and the naming of it, like,
Yes.
I am going to feel this way most likely. And then when it
Yeah.
happens, be like, there it is.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm prepared for this.
Yes. 100%. It really, it seems very trivial. Like, what are you talking about? Self-awareness and men, but it makes such a significant difference when you do that.
It does. And one thing I wanted to say, I think it's so important in general when, we see someone, we're like, oh, I love their outfit, or like, oh, that's so intentional. I love how they're showing up, or whatever, that we name it, so that they can see it, because often we're so stuck in our limiting beliefs and negativity and shame
Yes.
and things like that, right? We
Yes.
we need those data points that show us the good ways we're showing up. Sometimes we don't see them. And
100%.
can you imagine if someone's going through your framework and they make an expand list and they tell someone, I'm going through this process and I just wanted to tell you, it just filled my heart that you ended up on my expand list. And I just wanted to say thank you for ending up. So beyond
Yes.
putting them on the list, then opening up, now it's an exercise of gratitude to give it more
Yes.
weight, to say, like, by the way, you're on
Yes.
my list.
You're
You're
on
my
my list.
my good list. But don't tell the release list. That's one's for the fire. That one's just like, bye.
That one's for you to build your awareness, so that, because we do have situations, whether it's work, right, where we're working with a colleague that just is rubbing you against the wrong way, and you have to still engage with that colleague. Building that list and knowing, okay, I do have to see this person every day or every week. How am I going to show up when this person is in the room? I think that is the purpose of that list. It's not about, okay, I'm going to make my good and naughty list, and it's about, how am I going to show up when I am dealing with people that don't really make me feel good. And I think that's really the purpose of that work and that framework.
And it really brings out it's a great framework for boundaries in general, because boundaries aren't about how we are telling someone they are going to show up for us. That's
Yeah.
about that plan you discussed, okay, I'm taking stock of this issue, challenge,
Yeah.
person in my life, situation. These are the points that I'm setting boundaries around, and this is how I'm going to respond if that boundary is crossed. And it's all internal, it's
Yes.
not external.
Yes. 100%. I think boundaries are so important, because if you don't set boundaries for yourself, then everyone's just going to walk all over you, right?
Oh, it's so true.
Yeah.
I want to talk about your book. So you've talked a lot about the inner workings of the book and the wonderful structure that you are sharing with people that are really great. They're so actionable. I'm going to just read off the description of the book too. So again, the title is Alive Again, and you're published through Simon and Schuster.
Yes. With Forefront Books coming up
That's
August 11th.
I can't wait. So I want people so I'm going to read what the description is of the book. So in Alive Again, Dr. Michelle Machado examines the invisible forces shaping our attention in a culture that profits from distraction. And the quiet disconnection stealing our peace, purpose, and presence one moment at a time, and that you draw on personal experience, neuroscience, and spiritual insight for the book, which I think is really important, the expert background, because there are so many books on this
Yes.
topic, but
Yes.
not every book has a really helpful structure to it and really helpful insights that serve as, not something telling you how to live your life, but giving you insights that spark curiosity in your mind for how you are going to make a change if it's on your heart to do
Yes.
so. Now, it does feel like we are in a war for our attention,
Hmm.
right? Just like those subscriptions that we discussed.
Yes.
How do you think we can make changes in our lives to forge connection, like the daily things? You talked about coming back to yourself and filling your cup, right?
Yes.
And that starting your day from there, which is so beautiful.
Hmm.
But what are some things that we can do, or things that maybe we can try to cut out and replace with different habits to move towards forming those meaningful connections, building community, and get back to what's healing for our nervous systems and
Yeah.
our relationships, and away from the things that erode our relationships and our sense of self?
Yeah, I think so. One of the first chapters in my book talks about the fact that, really trying to bring about the awareness that we are in a war for our attention, that attention is the currency of control. And whoever controls your attention controls your life. And I kind of showcased how that shows up in my world, or how it showed up in my world, particularly with my, 6-year-old daughter at the time. And so the practices that I speak about in the book, I really start with, so I speak about human connection in my first TEDx talk, which is the one skill AI can't replace. And I talk about it on three fundamental levels, connection to self, because if we are not connected to self, if you are not connected to who you are, then everything that exudes from you is not authentic, right? And the connections that you're building with other people, or the things you're trying to achieve in life, it doesn't come from who you really truly are. And so that connection to self is the foundation for the book. The second layer is connection to others, really building that relational support. We are here to be, we are sort of, social beings. And so we thrive on being able to have a village around us to support us and to support one another. And the third one is connection to the world, to to a greater purpose in that world. So the reason the book starts with connection to self is because, again, if you are not truly grounded in who you are, then everything that comes from that is just, not true to who you are. So the practice I do, the morning practice, is one of the key things that really helps you ground your nervous system, because when research has shown that meditation and stillness can really calm your nervous system in many ways, both not just neurologically, but physiologically within the body as well. And when you do that, you then show up. How do you show up in your day to day life? Well, looking at ways in which you can actually step out with people for lunch, or for actual face to face conversations, rather than just let's get a Zoom. Zoom is convenient. I get it. And sometimes people are in different continents and they can't afford that. But find ways in your life where you can actually engage face to face with connections. And I think now, with the move back to work, I think that a lot of corporate organizations have requested people to come in. There's going to be a shift in that to be able to create more of those connections there. But I think then when you come outside of that and you look at your own family, we often see, and I describe this in my book, sitting at the dinner table, but like everyone's head down, or we're watching television and no one's really engaging in meaningful conversations. So I have things that I do where you ask random questions, getting to know your family members, or we'll play board games together. I mean, what happened to old fashioned board games, right? Or going out for picnics together. Often in the car when we are traveling somewhere, there's no devices. There's just us engaging in conversation. Either we're playing a game, or we're asking questions about where we're going, or we're thinking about, okay, what do we want to do? Really, just it can be sporadic. It can be simple enough, but I think the key is our default has become the device, our absolute default. And so the awareness of if attention is the currency of control, who are you giving your attention to? And how are you spending it? Because it's only a finite set of, energy and attention that you have in any given day. And so being really mindful of that, I talk about practices where, how do we get really still in our day, not just with ourselves, but with the people in our life. So getting rid of having digital detox, or having days where you're just kind of like connecting with each other. Those are some of the things that I would encourage our listeners to be able to think through. Stepping away from the often default of like, let's have a quick call, let's just, have a Zoom, rather than, let's go out, let's go for a movie, or let's grab lunch, let's grab a coffee. I think bringing those back in is going to hopefully build the meaningful social support that we need. Because I say we are more connected than any generation in history, but we are more lonely than any generation in history. And that comes because we are virtually connected rather than actually connected meaningfully in the real world.
And what an opportunity we have. It's almost like, remember when you were a kid and you were new at school? Maybe it's a new school year
Yeah.
and you just don't know what table to sit at,
Hmm.
right? But social media can often kind of be a way like, oh, I know someone at all of these different tables, but
Yeah.
then we don't take the next step of like sitting
No,
at the table with them. And it's
no.
true. Like, instead of seeing it as a disconnector, which in a way it is a big disconnector, we
Yeah.
could see it as like a little introduction. It's like, hey, I know you from, I love what you're doing here. I saw
Yeah.
this. And then start the conversation in the real life. So I love that. Have you seen Tales? Have you heard of it's a game, Tales, but it's all these fun conversation starters. And they have it for, I'm pretty sure they have it for dating and for work and
Yeah. Yeah.
family and different ages for kids. And
Yes.
we just love it. And
Yeah.
I would bring it out with my kids when I thought that we were kind of in a conversation lull.
Yeah.
And now they started bringing them out because they love how they feel
Yes.
when they have this invitation to tell their
Yes.
story, to bring up experiences and share them with the family. And then we use those as jumping off points. And I think games and those card games they are so underutilized as
100%.
tools to
Yeah.
connect, not only with our kids, but I recommend everyone. So
Hmm.
we're going to be doing a game night show. I have a media group where we're going to be doing community driven content, and one of our shows is based on getting to know people through playing games, getting to know local businesses, that sort of thing. But I will say, I don't think that you should seriously date someone until you've played games with them and see what kind of game player they are, or go into business with someone
100%.
until you've
100%.
played a game with them, because
Yeah.
that's kind of like getting to meet the 8-year-old version of them
Yeah.
right off the bat.
100%. And I think it's also so important because it's in the meaningful in the conversations you have with people, whether it's through games or painting or whatever it is you're doing, you start to see whether people can also hold conversations. Because I think we've lost a lot of us have lost that ability. It's like, oh, what do I say? I've been in rooms, and this is probably also more, not that it's not pertinent in adults. I think you can see it more with our youth about, having the face-to-face conversations, making eye contact. I think we're losing that ability of, how to really develop deep conversations with people. A lot of it is surface talk, right? And so I think that comes from being very authentic in who you are, and then being able to show up authentically with others, and taking a curious approach to others and wanting to learn more about them. And I'm not saying don't connect on virtually, because that's how we live, work, and play today, but it's taking those offline, or maybe engaging even deeper with people to build some of those meaningful connections. Because at the end of it, we are social beings. People need people.
Hmm. I love that, and it makes me think of some beautiful quotes that I've pulled from some of your talks, and it makes me think of finding that connection of being true to oneself and also engaging with the collective and working
Yeah.
towards the greater good.
Yes.
And finding the balance that works for you and allows you to show up as your best self. And so one of the quotes that I wanted to share is worthiness comes from within,
Hmm.
right? So starting here,
Yeah.
and then once you understand that, another quote, who do I want to become? So that's
Become.
where you're, kind of that to me,
Yeah.
that's the outward trajectory after coming home. Who
Yeah.
do I want to grow into? Like a tree, right? Like I'm allowed to
Yes.
prune bits of me.
100%.
And where do I want to grow?
Yeah. And I think one of the things, one of the last pillars of my book is called anchoring. So you awaken, you align to who, the life of design, the person you want to become. You create the practices that support that future version of you. And then it's anchoring, and that's part of the consistency piece, right? When you do it enough and you do it repeatedly, you'll start to see shifts not just in yourself, but you'll start to see shifts in your family and how they relate to you, and also the habits that they pick up when they're facing certain situations. And that's when you start to really, you start to blossom like a tree. You start to blossom because you're pruning certain parts, and now you're creating this new version of you that draws in newer opportunities and newer experiences, but the ripples that come from that, like the shade that you provide to people, right? Just because you are now in your fulsome glory because you've stepped into that. So that's the last pillar of the book. And I absolutely believe, especially in today's world, with social media, it's very easy to step into that comparison trap that we are obviously, other people are more successful, other people are financially abundant, other people are so lucky, I am not. And that really stems from a lot of deep rooted work that we have to do that comes from, experience and comes from programming. And I think that when you start to engage in that, you realize that it's not the outside that makes you feel worthy. It's who you are on the inside that makes you feel worthy. So how do you tap into that worthiness? Because when you do, it's like you just flourish in very different ways.
That's so beautiful. And you know what? It made me think of something really silly that I do with my son. He's only 6, he's almost 7, and he's had an obsession with fancy cars. And he kind of was like, oh, this is luxury. This is luxury. And
Yeah.
that is not something that we
Yeah.
model in our family
Mm.
or
Mhm.
value. So it was
Mhm.
really interesting. And so instead of shaming him, I was like, how can we change the attention so we bring the attention back to our experience and
Yeah.
not the wow, look at that car. Mom, you need to buy
Yeah.
that car.
Yeah.
And so what we started doing, it's really funny, but it seems to work, is I have a kids playlist in the car through like Amazon.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's got he loves these like really old songs like I've Got the Power, these like really classic rock or like
Oh
some,
yeah. Yeah.
funny songs that are really like high masculine energy
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
them. So when we see a car like that, now instead of being like, Mom, you should buy that car. It's so amazing. He's like, Mom, play the music, roll the windows down. So we like crank it up really loud. and I and I think, a lot of not, if you want a sports car, that's fine. I don't want to
Yeah.
I don't want to dull your joy. But at the same time, a lot of times when we are investing a lot of time and energy into something that looks a certain way,
Yeah.
it's because, again, we're really focused on the outside,
Outside.
right?
Yeah. 100%.
And I wanna bring the focus back to, like, "Hey, we're having fun in our car, 1,
Yeah.
and 2, maybe
Yeah.
we can help the other person also have, like, a little bit of fun." And so we kinda see, like, okay, are they gonna play along with us? Or are they gonna be
Yeah.
like, "Oh my
Yeah.
goodness, what are they doing?"
That's such a
So
perfect song though to play, like such a perfect song. It's
we have fun with it.
that's amazing. And I think there is such a emphasis in our world on on materialism, right? On things that be like, oh my God, that looks cool. That makes me look cool. And I have conversations like this with my 10-year-old all the time. And just, trying to bring them back as well to it doesn't matter what clothes you wear, what branded clothes you wear, because I'm not big on brands, like at least for that young age, that it's who you are on the inside that counts the most. And I think just through repetition and constantly kind of reminding her of that, it will hopefully, shift as she grows up. And I think it is already, and I'm seeing a huge change. But because when you see other people and other friends and having certain things that it's great to want things. If you want that, it's not about shaming, but it's really about not taking something at face value that I need that to feel this, and I think that's teaching my kids, and that's something I'm working on with my girls as well.
Exactly. And I think focusing on creating the feelings rather than chasing the
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, my son is going to really cherish the feelings he had when
Yeah.
we're like driving by people pumping
Yeah.
music way more than the feeling of buying a new fancy car. And that feeling
100%.
wears off really fast, but those
It does.
memories, those
Yeah.
last forever.
The dopamine surges and then it plummets. So,
So we're not chasing the external, we're kind of enjoying those feelings we have
yes.
from those precious moments, and we are learning how to decrease distractions in our life so we have more energy and time and
Yeah.
resources to build those. And we talked about so many wonderful ways to do that, and just stepping stones for if you're feeling depleted and you're
Yeah.
feeling that your focus isn't where you want it to be, to start that internal conversation,
Yes.
the ask yourself those curious questions and think about what habits can I start to integrate into my life, into my daily practices so I can start working towards where I want to be. Dr. Michelle Machado, this has been so fantastic. I want to make sure everyone knows how to learn more about you, how to bring you in as a speaker, how to get your book. Tell us where everyone can get the scoop on everything that you're doing.
So I think my social media profile, I'm very active on LinkedIn, Dr. Michelle Machado. You can find me on LinkedIn there. Or if you go to my website, it's michelledmachado.com. All of the details around connecting with me, you can find on either of those two sites. And I'm so excited for the opportunity to be here on your show, Dr. Shafer. It's been incredible, and I'm so grateful for the conversations we're having and for the work that you're doing. I think you're making such huge impact. And how lucky are your kids?
Oh, well, thank you so much. And how lucky are yours? I think the intentionality,
Yeah,
like,
100%.
you don't have to be a perfect parent.
No,
And you can start today with intentionality, and that will mean the world to your kids. So I think,
yes.
none of us need to put other people on pedestals. Again, bringing that energy to ourselves and just being like,
Hmm.
okay, what would happen if I decided to be really intentional about this thing tomorrow? And that has made all the difference for me and my kids. And like you said, when you start to get intentional with your life and how you're showing up, you will see it trickle
Absolutely.
down to the people that you're impacting. And it gives you control over the legacy you're creating, as you mentioned in your TED talk, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that you're passing on the legacy that you want to and not
Yeah,
just being on that hamster wheel and being on
yeah.
autopilot. So it's such beautiful insights. I'm so grateful that you were here. Thank you so much. You've given
Thank you.
such amazing insights and sharing your story so beautifully and vulnerably with our storytellers. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And storytellers, we appreciate you too. Your time, we know your resources and time are really valuable. And I hope that you took something away from today's discussion. I know I did. If you haven't already subscribed to the show and you enjoyed today's show, please do. And let us know what topics or episodes you like the most so that we can bring you more of what inspires you to reclaim your story and build your most beautiful future. Thank you so much for being here. As always, until next time, stay safe and take care. I'll talk to you soon.